Terrifying true stories from night shift workers. The empty hallway. The worst thing about the night shift is the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that presses down on your chest, making every little sound echo louder than it should. That was the silence that filled St. Jude's Medical Center after midnight, when most of the hospital had gone dark. The emergency wing always had a faint buzz of activity, but beyond those glass double doors, the corridors stretched into stillness, and every step felt like trespassing. Marcus, a new security guard, had been warned by the older staff about the third floor. "Don't linger up there," they said. "Just do your walkthrough and leave." No one ever explained why, but they all gave the same nervous laugh afterward, the kind of laugh that tries to hide fear but only makes it worse. That night, as Marcus climbed the stairwell past the second floor, the air grew colder. Not the kind of cold from broken heating, but a biting chill that clung to his skin and sank into his bones. When he pushed open the heavy door to the third floor, his flashlight flickered once, twice, before stabilizing. The hallway stretched long and empty, lined with patient rooms no longer in use. The smell hit him first, faint antiseptic mixed with something sour, something rotten. He whispered to himself just to break the silence. Just a floor check. 10 minutes. That's all. His footsteps echoed too loud, bouncing off the walls as if they weren't alone. He passed the first set of doors, all locked, each window smeared with years of dust. But then, one wasn't. Room 312. The door stood slightly ajar. Marcus froze. He was sure he had checked the locks during his first round. He pushed the door open slowly, and the hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. Inside, the room was empty. No bed, no equipment. Just bare walls, peeling paint, and a faint dark stain spreading across the floor in the corner. He stepped inside, raising the flashlight. That's when he heard it. Breathing. It wasn't his own. It was ragged, shallow, coming from the corner where the stain was. He swung the beam of light toward it, but the second the light hit, the sound stopped. Nothing was there. Just cracked tiles and peeling wallpaper. Marcus backed out quickly, pulling the door shut, and his hands shook as he scribbled a note in his logbook. But before he could leave, he heard a sharp knock from inside the room. One knock, then two, then three. Like someone was on the other side, waiting. He ran. By the time he reached the stairwell, his radio crackled to life with static. A woman's voice whispered through it, too faint to understand, then a sharp burst of static made him wince. He switched channels, but the same whisper followed as if it knew his name. Back at the security desk, Marcus tried to calm down. He told himself it was his imagination, that the place was old, that the stories were just stories. But then he checked the security cameras. Camera 3A, the hallway he had just left. On the grainy black and white feed, room 312's door was wide open again. And in the doorway something stood. It wasn't a person. The shape was tall, too tall, its head brushing the top of the frame. Its limbs bent wrong, too long, hanging at its sides. It didn't move, didn't breathe, it just stood there, facing the camera. And though the image was grainy, Marcus swore he saw its head tilt just slightly, as if it was watching him through the screen. His hands shook as he reached for the camera controls, zooming in. That's when the monitor cut to static. All the feeds flickered out at once, leaving only black screens hissing with static noise. Then every phone in the security office began to ring. Not one, not two, all of them. Desk phones, wall phones, even the payphone bolted to the corner. They all rang in unison, a shrill, piercing sound that filled the room like a scream. Marcus grabbed the nearest receiver with trembling hands. At first, nothing. Just silence. Then, slowly, that same ragged breathing from the third floor crept through the line. And then a voice whispered, so faint it barely existed. "Don't close the door." Marcus dropped the phone, heart pounding. The ringing stopped instantly, all of them at the same time. The office was dead quiet again. But when he looked up, the monitor for camera 3A flickered back on. Room 312. The door was no longer empty. This time, the figure had stepped out into the hallway, and it was walking toward the camera. If you think this story is terrifying, you're nowhere near prepared for what comes next. Make sure you subscribe, because this nightmare isn't over. It's just beginning. The presence on the third floor. The figure on the screen was 4 doorways from room 312 when the cameras died, but the sound of its steps didn't wait for the video to come back. They were not footsteps so much as a slow rearranging of air, a pressure that moved down the hall until it pressed against the security office door. Marcus stood without meaning to, and the chair rolled back with a scrape that felt too loud, too alive. His radio hissed. The battery indicator glowed full, but a voice scraped through the static as if it was speaking from inside the casing, the syllables damp and close. Close the door. He swallowed the urge to answer and pushed into the stairwell, because every part of him knew staying put was wrong. It wasn't bravery. It was instinct, the kind that makes you step forward because something behind you is learning your outline. The stairwell smelled like iron and wet stone. On the third-floor landing, the air had weight. Not cold, not heat, weight. His breath lifted white, though he didn't feel cold until the metal door brushed his palm and he snatched his hand back. Frost had formed along the push bar in delicate filigree, glowing faintly in the emergency light. His reflection in the wire mesh window was wrong. The mouth was a fraction too slow to move when his moved. He didn't look again. He pushed through. The hallway had stretched. That was the first wrongness he could name. On his first round, he counted 16 ceiling tiles between 308 and 312. Now there were at least 30 and they didn't line up straight. As he walked, each square light hummed to life a breath before he stepped beneath it, and died behind him as if the darkness were clicking its tongue. The smell of antiseptic broke, and something sour threaded through it, like fruit that looked perfect on the outside but went to water under your thumb. A floor machine sat abandoned against the wall, cord coiled like a sleeping snake. He passed it and saw damp footprints curving around it and toward 312, wide, bare prints with too many joints in the toes. They glistened as if freshly pressed, yet they pointed in the wrong direction, heels toward the door and toes toward him, as if someone had walked backward out of the room and was now just out of sight. He stopped at 312. The door stood open a hand's width. The window, once clouded to milk, was clear. Inside, the darkness had depth. His flashlight cut into it and made no difference at first, as though the beam were being swallowed. Then the room gathered itself, surfaced, and he saw that it wasn't empty anymore. An old iron bed frame sat in the center, anchored to the floor, the kind with rings for restraints and a crank at the foot. The mattress was wrapped in yellowed plastic. Condensation ghosted under the film in a slow breath. On the far wall, beneath peeling paint, a set of tally marks clustered in groups of 5 scarred the plaster, running skirt-high around the room like a child's crown. In the corner, where the stain had been, the tile looked freshly wiped, too clean, too bright, except for the shape that remained, a darkness that remembered a body. He took one step inside and the door side shut behind him. He turned the knob. It turned with him and then kept turning without his hand, completing a slow circle and stopping in a place that felt wrong under his palm. He lifted his hand and listened. The room breathed. Plastic whispered. Far down the corridor, a nurse's station bell dinged once, bright as a drop of glass. The radio clicked. No static this time. The voice was his. Just a floor check. 10 minutes. That's all. He blinked. He had said those words earlier. The recording was perfect. The catch in his throat, the way his tongue found the corner of a tooth. Then his voice spoke again, but not in a memory he owned. If you think this is as bad as it gets, his voice said softly, you're not ready for what comes next. His heart hammered. The mattress plastic settled with a sound like skin leaving skin. The restraints lifted a fraction as if pressing against the weight of wrists that were not there. He could see the indentations of hands and ankles deepen. A thread of air moved past his face, warmer than the room, carrying the stale sweetness of old breath. He raised the flashlight to the window glass. His reflection was not alone now. It filmed and reformed between blinks. Something tall behind him, its head bending too far to clear the frame, its arm an extra length between shoulder and elbow. It didn't sharpen when he focused. It blurred, and its blur looked more solid than the things that were clear. He turned. Nothing stood behind him, but his shadow fell wrong. It fell toward the light. He tried the door again and found it open without feeling the latch give. The hallway tilted as if the building exhaled. The overhead lights were dimmer. At the far end, where the exit sign burned its green exit promise, the letters had melted downward like wax. Beneath them, a woman stood with her back to him in an old-fashioned white uniform, starched cap pinned to smooth hair. She folded a chart against her hip and rocked slightly on her heels as if waiting for someone to turn a corner. Relief surged through him. Someone else, a nurse, a person. He started to call out and then didn't because she hadn't cast a shadow. He realized it because he had been borrowing hers without knowing it, and now the hall behind him was empty of his own. The nurse turned as if tugged by a string. Her face was as neat as the cap, a face that would not offend a mirror, pale and precise except for the mouth. It was a nurse's smile drawn too tight and held too long. Her lips didn't part when her voice arrived in the air between them and him. Close nothing you cannot open. The fluorescent above her spat and went black, and in the blink the space she occupied lost the memory of being occupied at all. The chart she'd held thunked lightly against the floor without bouncing, as though the air under it were thicker than air should be. He approached on stiff legs and looked down at the paper. The ink was smudged by a hand that had been too damp for too long. A name had soaked deeper than the others, bleeding through thin paper to the backing board. Marcus Lee, admit 312. He crouched and the floor sighed. The numbers wavered, then steadied. Somewhere down the corridor, wheels squeaked and bumped, a gurney moving with a lazy caretaker, except no one pushed it. It emerged around a corner and drifted toward him, sheets neatly folded, one restraint buckled and hanging like a tongue. It stopped when the bed's foot touched his shin, and the metal was warm as though another body had just slid off. The intercom crackled. Somewhere in the building a board operator started to say something and swallowed it. The system took his silence and poured a code over it. Code blue. 3rd floor. Code blue. The voice was indifferent, but the hum under it vibrated his teeth. Every door along the corridor unlocked with a small internal pop and swung open an inch, as if whatever lived in the rooms had been waiting politely for permission to breathe. From the closest doorway a black line crept across the tile, a thin, shining trail like a snail's path, but straight, purposeful. It wrote itself toward him, letter by letter, in a hand that didn't lift between strokes. Do not close the door. He looked to 312. The door had drifted wider on its own, though he remembered letting it stand barely ajar when he came out. He felt that wrong weight in the air again, the sense of something enormous settling onto a delicate surface, making no sound because it had decided to make no sound. His heart tried to leave through his throat. He took one step toward the stairwell. The lights went out. All of them. Not a flicker, not a surge, just a clean subtraction. The hall swallowed itself. In that perfect absence, he heard the hospital as it had always been beneath the voices and alarms. The building's bones ticking, the air handling units dragging breath through throatfuls of dust, the chorus of dead machines remembering their last instructions. And beneath even that, a whispering the walls had learned, the residue of every plea that had ever been ignored here, gathered and rubbed together until it made a new plea that didn't sound like words at first. Marcus took 2 careful steps, found the wall and slid his palm along it. The paint felt like skin that had slept too long in a cast. His fingers found a switch, and though he knew it would not matter, he flipped it. The darkness accepted the gesture and gave nothing back. Behind him, plastic creaked. In front of him, breath touched his cheek from a face that did not have to be close to be close. He spoke because his voice was the only proof he had that he still existed in a world where voices kept shape. Who's there? 1,000 small answers happened at once. The flutter of paper from every open room, the click of restraints tightening by one hole, the pianissimo chorus of tongues learning the taste of teeth. Over all of it, gently, insistently, his own voice returned, not from the radio now but from the hallway itself. You're here. A point of light bloomed ahead, small as the end of a cigarette. It brightened to the size of an eye. Not 2. 1. It swung left like a curious head and then right, then lifted higher, as if the tall thing that wore it were rising from its crouch beneath the ceiling. As it straightened, the light passed across a window and for a heartbeat struck his eyes. The glare was not bright enough to blind, but his vision skipped, and in the blink he saw the afterimage that the light had burned onto his brain. The afterimage showed him the hall as it would have appeared if nothing had changed in 50 years. Nurses moved down it swiftly on white shoes. A man struggled on a gurney strapped at wrists and ankles, black hair plastered to his forehead, mouth open on a scream that did not make air move. In that ghost of a scene, a figure as tall as the door frames leaned down and pressed a cool palm to the screamer's face. And the scream ended without the mouth closing. Everything in the afterimage turned its head on the same slow hinge and looked at Marcus, as if they had felt him happen. The light went out. The imprint stayed. He stumbled backward, hit a door frame and gripped it so hard his fingers hurt. The door pivoted and folded him inside. Tile caught his heel. He remembered the number before he saw it. 312. He fell. His shoulder struck the iron bed. The mattress gave the way water gives, too easily, as if an old body had sunk into it and left its outline for others to lie in. The restraints coiled against his wrist on their own, buckles whispering as they fed through rings. He tore his hands away, skin burning where leather kissed it. The room brightened by a fraction as if someone had opened an eye. He did not look toward the window, but he saw what stood reflected there anyway because the room saw it and that was enough. It tilted its head. Not curious. Praising. He edged toward the door. The handle turned under his hand, but not from his grip. It turned the opposite way, a patient, deliberate closing until the latch kissed its seat. The air thinned. His ears filled with the sea. The walls leaned in to hear. He pressed his mouth to the crack and forced the smallest sound through, not a scream, just his name, to prove there was a name. A breath answered from the other side of the wood, his breath, and then a second against his ear from the center of the room that wasn't his at all. "Don't close the door," the room said, and the bed rolled 6 inches across the tile toward him without wheels moving, restraints uncoiling like hands that had been told to wait long enough. The door that should never close. Marcus pressed his back against the door of room 312, fingers white-knuckled around the cold metal knob. The wood trembled against him, not from his weight but from the pulse of something pressing on the other side, something patient, something hungry. The restraints on the iron bed slithered against the frame with the sound of leather tugged through buckles. They were waiting. He tried not to look at the window, but the reflection was stronger than sight. It showed him twice, his face pale and wild, and behind both versions, a figure too tall to stand in the room without bowing. Its head was bent at an impossible angle, eyes like 2 hollow lanterns, glowing faintly as though lit from within by ash and coal. He forced himself to breathe. 1, 2. His chest shook. Then the lights flickered back on, not in the hallway but in this room alone. The fluorescence sputtered into a dim, sickly glow that made the shadows thicker, more solid. The air turned heavy and sweet, clinging like syrup, and a low hum rattled the tiles. The tally marks on the wall deepened before his eyes, the plaster cracking as if new nails were carving them fresh. He stumbled toward the gurney, hoping to use it to wedge the door, but the moment he touched the metal frame it rolled forward on its own, carrying him deeper into the room. He tried to pull away, but the wheels spun silently across the floor, dragging him closer to the bed. The plastic-wrapped mattress bulged, indentations forming, as if unseen hands and feet pressed against it from beneath, desperate to break through. The restraints snapped free. They didn't dangle anymore. They reached. Marcus lunged for the door, slamming his shoulder into it. The knob twisted in his hand, but not with his force. It turned against him, slow and deliberate, and the latch drew back. The door opened inward, swallowing him into darkness that wasn't the hallway anymore. He was standing in a corridor, yes, but not the one he had left. This one stretched endlessly in both directions, walls lined with doors marked with numbers that spiraled upward beyond reason. The air here was suffocating, humming with whispers that slid under the skin. He turned to look behind him. Room 312 was gone. The door he had come through had vanished into endless wall. The whispers grew louder. They weren't in English, not at first, but they pressed meaning into his mind until he understood. "You opened it. Now you must not close it." From the nearest doorway, shadows spilled like smoke, shaping themselves into long fingers that scraped across the floor. One door creaked open and he saw a figure crawling out, not walking, not standing, but dragging itself on all fours, head twisted backward, mouth open in a smile that never blinked. Its teeth clicked together like typewriter keys, spelling words in every snap. "Stay." He turned and ran. The hallway did not change. Door after door, number after number, all identical, all endless. The whispers followed him, weaving into his breath until he could not tell if he was still running or if the hall itself was running beneath him. The lights overhead burst one by one, showering sparks that froze midair before fading like dying stars. The last light ahead of him flickered, showing something tall standing just beyond it. Not moving. Waiting. He slowed without meaning to, feet dragging. The thing tilted its head, and the glow of its eyes filled the dark. Then it spoke, not from its mouth but from the air, the walls, the floor, and from inside Marcus's own chest. "You let me in." He fell against the wall, gasping. His vision doubled. In one he was still in the endless hallway. In the other he was back in the security office, staring at the monitors. Room 312's door stood wide open on the grainy feed. The figure stepped closer, frame by frame, moving down the hall toward the camera, toward him. Both realities bled into each other until they were one. He was in both places and the entity was in both with him. The intercom clicked. Every speaker in the hospital hissed alive. A single sentence spilled through them, carried by thousands of voices layered together. Some human, some not. "You closed nothing." The doors all along the hall flung wide at once. From each one came shapes. Nurses without eyes, patients with mouths sewn shut, shadows stitched to their heels instead of their bodies. They spilled out silently, their steps pounding without sound, rushing toward him from every direction. Marcus fell to his knees. The tall figure loomed before him, bending down, face inches from his own. The eyes burned cold, searing his vision with a white-hot brand. It whispered, but not into his ears, into his thoughts. "You are mine now, and so are they." And then silence. The hospital was empty again. The hallway was gone. Marcus was gone. Only the open door of room 312 remained, waiting, forever waiting. And as you listen now, you feel it too. The cold crawling along your spine. The weight of something watching from just behind you. Don't turn around. Don't close your door. Because now it knows you heard its story. And it's already found a way in. Candle, you feel it, don't you? The whisper. The cold in your room. You're not alone anymore, and neither am I. If you dare to know more, don't forget to subscribe. You'll need it.